Long enough to cover the subject and short enough to keep it interesting. Welcome to Outta My League. I'm Nick Diaz. March Sadness is now officially over. The biggest sports betting season in our country, even more than the Super Bowl, is officially back after a year of hiatus. So, for the past week, here's what I've been doing to prepare. For the past week, I've been doing research on how analytics and history can tell you who will win March Madness and who will not. So what I did was I found 5 qualities that almost 100% or close to 95% of all national championship teams in the last 20 years, in the 21st century, what they all have in common. The 5 things that they all almost have in common. And then I'm going to tell you which teams this year in 2021 have those same 5 traits. And then at the end, I'll tell you how LSU stacks up with those 5 traits afterwards. So, without further ado, here are the qualities that analytics says almost every single national championship team in the last 20 years or more has had these 5 qualities. So, first quality, number 1, balanced scoring. In the last 20 years, every single national championship team has at least 5 players that average 8 points per game, at least 3 players that average 12 points per game, and unless you have more than 5 players averaging 8 points per game, then you need, like if you ever have 6 or 7 players averaging 8 points per game, then you need at least 1 player averaging 15 points per game. In the last 20 years, the one exception that didn't have 15 points per game, 2012 Kentucky. 5 players with 8 points, 3 players averaging 12 points, and at least 1 player averaging 15 points. Quality number 2. In the last 20 years, every single national championship team has at least 3 key players that are at least 6'7". At least 6'7", 6'7" or taller. Now, they don't have to be starters. They could be key role players coming off the bench, but they have to get a lot of minutes and significant playing time coming off the bench. So 3 key players that are at least 6'7" or taller. Quality number 3. In the last 20 years, every single national champion has at least 1 top 50 NBA draft pick. Now, the NBA draft hasn't happened yet, but we have predictions and we have scouting reports, and if you add all them up, I found which ones have which. So, quality number 4. In the last 20 years, all except for 2 national championship winners, all except 2 in the last 20 years, have had at least 1 upperclassman that plays guard. Doesn't strictly have to be point guard, doesn't have to necessarily be a senior, but a junior or a senior guard. It could be shooting guard, wing player, or point guard. The only exception, 2012 Kentucky, they're the outlier. And the other one was 2015 Duke. Tremendously talented teams, huge outliers, exceptions not the rule. And the last one, number 5. In the entire history of the NCAA tournament, no team has ever won the national championship shooting less than 32.9% from three-point line going into the tournament. So your regular season average going into the tournament, then you will never win the national championship. No team since 1983, since the three-point line was put into college basketball, has ever won the national championship shooting less than 32.9%. So, here are the 5 teams in 2021 that have exactly, and I mean exactly, all 5 of these qualities. All 5. They are Gonzaga, West Virginia, Kansas, Texas Tech, Texas, Oklahoma State, Alabama, Florida State, and Illinois. That's it. Gonzaga, West Virginia, Kansas, Texas Tech, Texas, Oklahoma State, Alabama, Florida State, Illinois. 9 teams. Those 9 teams. So historically, the analytics are heavily on those 9 teams' sides. They're heavily on their side. Oh, and one more thing I should mention that's kind of important. I guess it's a 6th quality. There has never, in the history of the NCAA tournament since 1939, there has never been one Final Four without at least one team that's from the Eastern Time Zone. One team from the Eastern Time Zone has made it to the Final Four every single year. At least one team. And on this list, there are only two teams that are in the Eastern Time Zone. Florida State and West Virginia. Now, that's not to say they're going to automatically make the Final Four. There could be another Eastern Time Zone team that makes the Final Four. But again, history, analytics on their side. Now, this is not to say that Ohio State or Baylor or Michigan can't win the national championship, because they came pretty close. Matter of fact, I'll name you the three teams that barely made the list. The only teams that barely missed out on this list, that were missing just one quality, were Arkansas. Their three-point shooting's not good enough. Michigan, up until recently they were, but their best guard and second leading scorer is now hurt. And the third team, LSU. So let's talk about LSU. The one thing that LSU is missing is balanced scoring. They have everything else you want from a national champion except balanced scoring. 5 players who score at least 8 points. LSU has only 4 players that score at least 8 points per game. But to make up for it, analytically speaking, if you don't have exactly 5 players that score 8 points per game, everything else goes up. So instead of having only 3 players that score 12 points or more, now you have to have 4 players that score over 12 points. Instead of having 1 player that scores 15 points or more, you now have 2 or 3. Well, LSU has made up for that. And you want to know who is the 4th player on LSU's team that averages exactly 12 points per game? Darius Days. And you want to know what LSU's record is when Darius Days scores that many points? They are 15-1. You want to know what LSU's record is when Darius Days doesn't score that many points? They are 0-8. And in LSU's 1-point loss to Alabama in the SEC Championship on Sunday, Darius Days scored 2 points. Analytics! So now you understand why the nerds are taking over. So, what are LSU's chances of winning in the tournament? Now look, first things first, I know LSU fans and non-LSU fans were just beside themselves when LSU got the 8 seed, because, let's face it makes no sense why they would be an 8 seed. They should be higher, at least a 7. And LSU has every right to be pissed off, and LSU fans have every right to be pissed off. But you know who else is pissed off? Michigan. Number 1 seed, Michigan. They get the most dangerous 8 seed in the tournament. The second LSU was announced as an 8 seed right under Michigan, every single commentator went, ooh, look at Michigan. They may have got a raw deal. They may have to play number 8 LSU. They're a dangerous team. Michigan's second leading scorer is out indefinitely. And if LSU and Michigan win their first 2 games, like they should or will be favored, then red-hot 8-seeded LSU is finally playing defense. LSU is finally learning to close out close games. LSU has the 3rd best offense in all of college basketball, and now LSU has a chip on their shoulder, and LSU is pissed off. Michigan's not happy about it either. It's all about perspective. And before I go any further, let me say this about the Trendon Watford missed 3-point shot against Alabama on Sunday. Stop saying it was bad coaching and play calling by Will Wade, because it wasn't. And I'll tell you why. After the game, Javonte Smart said the play was designed for him to pass it to Watford, and then for Smart to then come off the ball screen and catch the ball and shoot it. The problem? Smart threw a bad pass. He overthrew Watford, and Watford had to rush the shot. It was a good play call. Poor execution. So, glass half empty. What's glass half empty? LSU got screwed and has to play in the dreaded 8-9 line, which they've been trying to avoid all season long, even though they did everything they possibly could and should have been off the 8-9 line. But they're there anyway and have to play number 1 Michigan if they win their first game. That's glass half empty. Glass half full? Of all the number 1 seeds LSU had to line up with in their bracket, they lined up with Michigan. a team who is limping into the tournament. Now, I'm not one for making any predictions, at least not yet. But if Darius Days averages exactly 12 points or more in every single tournament game, LSU can't necessarily win the national championship. I won't go so far to say that. But I believe LSU has the ability to make it to the Final Four. No pressure, Darius. Thanks for listening to Out of My League. If you like what you heard, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, or follow me on Twitter and Facebook in the description link below.